sitting over there.
Okay, good morning. Let's get started and give Gwin some time. As you know, we're doing our prayer requests at the end of the lesson, and we're going to start this down using this room. But welcome. We also welcome Brian Rollins, who is right here by Ken. So say hi to Brian. He's a new member of Wilson. We're glad you're here, Brian. Okay, so big picture announcements. I'm going to tell you a bunch of things. December 2nd, if you can, there's going to be an e-bike going out. We've just now, I'm getting the emails. I haven't gotten them yet from Perennial. They're going to join us. They're a small class, but we're going to have a brunch on December 2nd, Saturday, 11 to 1. We think it's going to cost, I'm sorry to tell you this, about 13 bucks a piece. The meal's 11, and we're buying cookies from the church to decorate, and they're 8 bucks a dozen to buy from them, but they're going to be cut out, and all that's really a little steep. But it's be about 13 bucks a person. Don't anybody not come because you don't have money, okay, on this thing. So,
It's worth it
and we're trying and we're trying to decorate the cookies. They're probably going to end up going, remember when we did Room in the Inn at the Austin Street Shelter? That's probably where we're going to be sending them. We thought about sending them to our children's house, but the children, as Diana pointed out, can't have them. Many of them are on restricted diets. It would be totally unfair, for that to happen. So, and as Mike points out, if some of them don't pass QC, we may have to eat them. But, at any rate, so the idea is we're going to decorate them. We need to have a meeting with Elizabeth because she was a decorator and used to does cookies and she has all kinds of stuff. But she will make us different shaped cookies for this. But the idea is we'll decorate them during this time and they'll be given away to the Austin Street Shelter. Okay, so that's what's happening. That's Saturday, December 2nd, 11 to 1. I'm going to send out an e-bite invitation on it. It's important that you look at it because that's how many people we're going to tell Elizabeth to cook for. It's, I don't remember what it is, Laura. It's eggs and it's pastries and it's sausage.
Or ham.
Ham or something. Okay, something like that.
Yeah.
But it'll be a good brunch. But the main thing is we're going to get about 6 trays of cookies, and we're going to need to decorate those 6 trays of cookies, 6 dozen cookies during that time. So that's the deal, and Perennial will be invited, okay, to come.
Is that the James Gallery?
James Gallery, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You'll see an e-bite invitation coming out. Like I say, if you would, don't fill that. You look in your spam filters. I'm waiting for emails from Perennial, but I'll hopefully just talk to Sean today, and he's supposed to give us those emails. Okay, All In. All In is going on, all in across the church. If you haven't seen this, haven't come to by mail yet, let's pass that around. These are the only thing I'm going to do today is before your lesson, Gwin, is all the church announcements. The turkey stuff. Some people are going to just give money. Some people are going to collect, are going to get food and bring it up here. I'm going to get some bankers boxes from our box supplier that we use at work, and I'll get them up here so that we can put them in those because they say that stacks a heck of a lot better. Bonnie and Robert and Ken had to load the truck last time, and boxes stack a lot better than baskets. So there's just give money. Laura will collect some money right now, and then I think, quite frankly, we need to give that money either to Ken or Robert or Bonnie. We were going to be here on that Thursday and to do that. And we're going to just leave our stuff here, but you can bring your stuff in by the 16th, but it has to be here by 9 a.m. on the 16th, on that Thursday morning.
Well, can you give me the date, because I need to get my calendar, the assembly point?
Assembly, they're going to, Bonnie and Robert are going to come here before that 9:30 and get into this room and put it together.
Okay, we're gonna, I'll help.
Oh, it's Thursday at 8:30.
Yeah.
Here.
It's
And
coming.
you need to get a janitor with you because the room's going to be locked.
Yes.
So you need a janitor to get back in here.
Yeah, we had told Heather, we talked to Heather, or communicated with her. She said 8:30.
So a lot going on this time of year. Yeah.
That's right.
You're not going to believe the next email you see from me because Heather has about 8 things that we can do during Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it's going to be a long one. Sorry, I'm going to apologize to you in advance. So, anyway, there is a Caregivers Day out that is happening here. This was in our box this morning. We'll pass that around. And if you need any information about the food baskets, like I say, some people have just prefer to give money, and that's fine. Just do what you can. The idea of these baskets, we're trying to get 75 from Wilshire. Wilkinson Center's trying to do 800 of these baskets. And at the last count, Carrie told me last night there were 61 baskets, but it looks like there's maybe 64 baskets at least now.
Right. She had commitments for 60.
Right.
And then I knew mine was coming through.
Right, so that's 61 out of the 75 we're trying to get. I think that goal's gonna get met. So that's a
It'll
good
be
thing.
close. We didn't meet it last year quite, and Heather was okay with it.
Right, and there's a group of youth that are making pumpkin pies and pecan pies and selling them to help raise funds for their mission trip. So if you want to do that, pass that around, take a look. Man, everybody's got, sorry. Okay, that, is there any other group announcement we need to make before we turn this over to Gwin? And Gwin, we're gonna conk about, if you can quit about 10:35 or so.
Okay.
Then we'll do prayer requests, and if you haven't signed the prayer request book that's coming around, please do.
Did you mention that on top of the Thanksgiving baskets, we have the grocery sacks for White Rock Center of Hope? I don't see one up here.
There are some, in case you don't want to do that, or in case you really want to do more, you do this, okay?
Yeah, that one's not it's not an expensive deal to do.
Right, and we can pass that around, take a look at it, but we're trying right now to finish these baskets, but if that's what you prefer, knock yourself out, bring them, and those will go out as well, so. Okay, let's just go into the lesson, and then we'll have our prayer and prayer requests at the end.
Okay, good. Well, I hope that you have read the book of James. And because we're not gonna have not gonna have time to read every passage, although it is an absolute treasure trove. I hope you realize that. It is important simply because here is one person who seems to know us. Do you find, when you read the book of James, do you find yourself in there? Yes, I think we do. James was writing to people. Sometimes Paul, who was highly educated for his day, gets to writing to other people. And he gets to debating with the temple, you know. But James is writing for us. It's a very practical book. It seems to have been regularly used. It was passed around a lot. That in itself probably contributed to some of the reasons why it had trouble getting into the canon, because somebody would add a little note here and a little note there, and some, it might get rearranged and all of that. And so we're not entirely sure, but it is a wonderful book. It actually reflects, as much as any book in the New Testament, the teachings of Jesus. More than Paul, it is somebody who knew Jesus, or who knew a lot about Jesus, because you see a lot of the teachings of Jesus reflected in this. And it just focuses on Christian living. I have a number of people that I tend to read a lot who deal with this, and every one of us do. We have the people we like to read for devotional content and for just helpful content, and you can go to any bookstore, any Christian bookstore, and find row after row of all kinds of self-help and do this and do that and so forth. This is what this book was to the early day church. It was something that I can imagine somebody would be in, they'd be discussing something, and somebody, well, James says, you know, if you read James, you remember, of course that's what, authorship, there are a lot of people named James. It actually translates the Hebrew word Jacob, but there were lots of Jameses. James and John, the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee. James, the son of Alphaeus. There was a James who was the brother of Jude. And there were probably a lot of Jameses. Tradition has assigned this book to James, the half-brother of Jesus, sometimes called James the Just. And the reason being is that this James, the half-brother, the brother of Jesus, was very active in the Jerusalem church. He was around for a long time. He was very active. For instance, James the son of Zebedee, we know, was martyred in 44 AD, CE now, that term we're using. So if this book was written, it had to be done before 44. There were a number of others that slip in and out, and of course it might have very well have been some person named James, or just an editor who said, you know, I remember hearing James do this and do that and do that, and here he writes it down. I think you're really safe going with tradition and just taking James, the brother of Jesus, James the Just, because he is the most visible of the Jameses that we know.
The veritable James gang, don't
The veritable James gang, right. Jesse and Frank got theirs later,
Yeah.
as it goes. Timing, you know, if it's James the son of Zebedee, it has to be before 44. If his reference to the dispersion has to do with the destruction of the temple, it has to be after 70, because that's when the temple was destroyed, and the actual diaspora, the spreading of the Jews, began. I just think it probably is written in that period, that in the 50s, as most of the texts that I consulted, the commentaries put it there. And when he talks about the dispersion, he's probably not talking about the actual diaspora that occurred after the temple was destroyed and the Jews were literally, physically pushed out. They were being scattered already. And he's writing basically to Christian Jews. And so those people were already on the run. They couldn't even get along with the elders, even the Christians within the Jerusalem church. So they were spread all over, and we know that in Paul's trips he met Christians in various places. So pick a date, and I don't think that changes the meaning of it at all. What we do know is this is a James who knew his Torah, because he knows the law very well. He's not an uneducated person, so he's heard the law discussed, and he's familiar with the teachings of Jesus. There was an interesting study that came out, and it later made its way into one of the, I believe this was a National Geographic study about the ancient world, and there was a reference to Jesus and to Joseph, the builder, who we think of Joseph, the father of Jesus, as being a carpenter. And this said, actually the word could be translated builder. Now, a builder is a little bit different than a carpenter. A builder could be a contractor. And it began to take, what they were following through here was that we know that Jesus was highly educated. We've always ascribed that to more spiritual things, but the truth is, he could have been really well educated in an upper middle class home.
You think, Son of God being highly educated.
Well, you know, we still want to debate whether how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
Really?
So we will get, you know, we
That's
argue
us,
about all these
not
kinds of
him.
things. But if that were true, then James would have grown up in the same household and therefore would have been a highly educated person, and I think this carries out. It did have a hard time getting into the canon. There were many of the early church fathers who just did not want it included. And later on, Martin Luther didn't like it because, why?
A lot of works.
Yes, the emphasis on works rather than faith. And so he didn't want it in. But as I said, it was highly used in the early church, and so it made it in. There are at least 12 general themes that most of the commentaries agree on, and you can look at them here. And in looking at the themes, what maybe one or two things stand out about just looking at the themes?
The basic works.
Basic works, obviously, that's a big one, right. What else? Who gets hit at least twice? The rich, the rich. James,
Were there no God-fearing rich people back in these times? They're
well,
always they're going after the rich, you know? Like they're a pariah of some
well,
sort.
it's because, I think that's exactly what the rich lorded it over the poor,
Every one of them?
just about. Now,
But
what we're looking at here, and that's why I wanted us to discuss it. Go ahead.
Bill taught us a lesson about how Jesus did use wealthy people, whether it was Lydia, whatever, to help the cause, and they are part of the reason that the gospel spread so much.
And there were many. Here is what most of the commentaries say: we shouldn't be using the term rich. We should be using the term greedy, because that's what he's really talking about. Greedy. What did Jesus say about money? Money's the root of all evil.
No,
No, what did Jesus say?
it's a love.
The lust for money. When money becomes the most important thing in your life, and actually it's more about material. What, in the story about the rich farmer, what was he worried about? More barns, more things, more toys. And I think that's what James is talking about here. He's talking about showing deference to those with lots of material things and all. He's talking about not playing favorites. He's talking about don't fall into the trap of thinking that greed is good, because greed, the lust for money, the lust for power, the lust for things is not good. It wasn't good then, and it is not good now, and we're still dealing
In
with that.
spite of what Michael Douglas did.
Yes, exactly.
But isn't this is controversial, right? Because sometimes people say that Jesus was very socialistic. Jesus was a socialist, right? Scholars sometimes are categorized as that.
Yeah. Jesus didn't even know what socialism was.
Fair enough, but the
Marx hadn't
concept.
come along.
The
But,
concept.
when we go back and look at things, Jesus just believed that we ought to be people who shared, who loved, who cared more about each other than we did about things. And that's why he taught the lesson on the lust for money, the love of money, of things, was the root of all evil, because that'll lead you down a path you don't want to go. So,
The church is not, it's not a country club,
no,
nor a book club.
no,
This is something you have a DNA, all of us have. It's the salvation of Jesus Christ.
I don't want to get into this to spend too much time on this, but what is the valid use of power and money and things? To do good, yeah, to do good. There's a great book out if you like to read out kind of books that parallel. It's by a man by the name of Dacher Keltner, Keltner. He is a social psychologist teaching out in California, and he has written a book called The Power Paradox, I think it's called. And it is about this very thing. It's a study of how power is used, and the thing that makes it very good is he used his graduate students to do research projects, very practical research projects, and just to show this. And interestingly enough, one of them was he had his students stand on a corner and watch who ran red lights, who ran yellow lights.
DCS.
The car, by how expensive the car is.
By expensive car. That was the study.
Is that right?
And you know, who knows? You can make anything say Let's get back to the lesson. So let's start and look at some of the text. And the first has to do with what happens when things don't work out the way you thought they were going to work out. When things come along and you're tempted and tried, the old hymn, tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why things are so, whatever they did. Further along, we'll know all about it. And here's what he says, is that, in essence, faith is a muscle. The literal interpretation, the definition of the word pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S, is a verb rather than a noun. Faith is a verb. You do faith, you don't have faith. Faith is something you do. Actually, the word is better translated faithfulness, which has to do, is more of an action word than anything else. So when you are faced with trials and tribulations, James says, use that. Learn from it. Because there's an old adage that I've heard people use a lot of times. It says, when you go around the block enough times, you get to know the block. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's what why age is a good thing, because we've seen many of those things. It's not new to us. We're not constantly reinventing the wheel, because we've seen these things. We learn from them, and that's what he's saying, is learn from these things. Your faith will get you through, because faith, trust, faithfulness, those are the things that stand out when you are faced with trials. Who was he writing to? What were they going through?
Believers under trial, right? They were being persecuted.
You know, some of them who were Jewish Christians had already been kind of excommunicated from the Jewish communities, and even some of the Jewish Christian communities. And if you were a Gentile Christian, for heaven's sake, the whole Judaizer conflict was going on. You have to eat a certain way, you have to be circumcised, you have to become a Jew to become a Christian. So there was a lot of conflict going on. And if that weren't enough, just what was happening in the Roman world at the time. So it was not easy being a Christian. And that just what he says, this is where he's talking about how you live your life. I know it's not easy, he says. I know you're being tried every day. Your tough things are happening to you. Put your faith to work. He says, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Faith is a muscle, and the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Very, very practical little lesson from it. He then goes on to talk about poverty and riches. And he says, let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field, its flowers falls, and its beauty perishes. It is the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away. And again, if you just substitute greedy or materialist in that, you probably can read that. Then he said, blessed is anyone who endures temptation. And he goes on and he says, no one, when tempted, should say, I am being tempted by God. We hear that a lot. We have a lot of people who live their life as if life is a God thing. That if the light turns green, that's God. God gave you a green light so that you could get through.
Praying to win a football game.
That's right. Do we really believe that God cares who wins the football game? My wife has a really dear friend. We love her dearly, but I mean, everything that happens is a God thing. If a parking place materializes, well, that's funny and we laugh at it and all, but the serious part is when we get down to God gave her cancer, God did this, God imagine the talk radio going on about the event in Sutherland Springs. There are people saying, well, it was the sinners who caused this. It was people, they weren't right with the Lord and all, and God visited that on them. God did not do that. An evil person did that. A person who could have done good or evil did evil. And that's the answer. And that's what he's saying. You're not tempted by God. If God tempted you, then what would that make God?
Temptress?
Less than holy. What, a God who would tempt you is a God who's just like us.
Yeah.
And God is not like us. We are like God, but God is not like us because God does not tempt. God cannot be tempted, is what James is saying. He said, get a grip, guys. Understand what happens. He goes on to say, but one is tempted by one's own desires, being lured and enticed by it. Who sins? Does God sin? Who sins? Me. You. We sin. We sin because we want to sin. We sin because it makes sense to us at the time. It's something we want to do. Our will is more important than God's will. We want that. We want to do that. And so that's where we come back to this idea about the rich and the poor.
A lot of times we sin and we don't realize it.
Well, we sin by omission, that's right. That's the old Dylan song that says, how many times can you turn your head and pretend that you don't see? We do that. We sin by that. But more often than not, we sin by commission. We sin by doing that. We do it every day, everyday life. And James was talking about to people who were living everyday lives. And I think that's...
Thus the term rationalization.
Well, rationalization, yeah. We rationalize. If something happens, we said, well, why is God doing that to me? Well, God is not doing that to us. We are doing that to ourselves because what do we know about sin? Sin has a cost, doesn't it? When we sin, there is a price to pay for sin. The wages of sin. We talk about that. In more rationalistic terms, the psychologist says for every act there is a consequence, right? The consequence may be good or the consequence may be bad, but there is a consequence. There is a, what is the law of thermodynamics? For every
action has
there is an
equal
equal
and
and
opposite
some reaction. That's right. That's the kind of world we live in. That is the world in which we find ourselves. And when, the foolish thing, if I go to the 36th floor of a building and jump out of it, trusting God to save me, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to fall flat and splat right on the ground because the law of gravity is not going to change just because I think that's what it is. So we are not tempted by God. God is not tempted. God wants, in fact, Jesus said, it is the Father's will that no one perish. If God could get God's way all the time, no one would perish. All would be safe in the arms of a loving Father who always keeps a plate set for us in the Father's house. That's the story of the prodigal son. What we often miss is that it's really about the loving Father, not the prodigal son. And I don't get that. All right. Moving on. Hearing and doing. Hearing and doing. 2, 1 through 13. And you get down to it and we get to one of those things that we learned very early in the primary Sunday school. And there was a little song that we sang. What was it called? Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only. Did you ever sing that?
We're saying Jesus loves me.
Well, we knew that. But there was a little chorus about being a doers, be ye doers of the word. And so doing the word doing the word is just as important, if not more important, than hearing the word. Do not be hearers only, but be doers of the word. So what's James saying to us by being, what does it mean to be a doer of the word? We're going to come back, circle back to it in a minute in a later passage. But what does it mean to be a doer of the word?
Be God's, Christ's arms and feet.
Absolutely. We are the arms and the hands and the feet of Jesus, right? That's what it means. I often teach people about the public relations, the value of it, and one of the hardest things that we have to face is there is absolutely no virtue in being a best-kept secret, because only the visible survive. And what James is talking about here is Jesus needs us to be sunbeams, right? The little song we sang, Jesus wants me for a sunbeam, and that's what we need to be. That's what it means to be a doer of the word. It's to hear, and hearing is not enough. Doing is a part of hearing. We have this, and it has real application for us today in the light of some of the things that happened at the church at Sutherland Springs. And it's called See Something?
Say something.
Say something. Do something about it. Don't just see it and turn your head. Do something about it. And that's what he's saying. When you see a brother in need, do something about it. Be a doer of the word and not a hearer.
In other words, your actions reflect your faith.
That's very true. Now, that's why Martin Luther didn't particularly care for James, because he thought he placed a lot more emphasis on works and on that. And there are some denominations that believe in salvation by works. The truth is, they are two sides of the same coin. They're just two sides of the same coin. The next theme is warnings against partiality, 2:1 through 13. Do you, with your acts of favoritism, really believe in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ? For if a person with gold rings and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in, and if you take notice of the one wearing the fine clothes and say, oh, have a seat here, please, while you say to the other one, stand over there, please, have you not become a judge? What was the lesson that Peter learned in his encounter with Cornelius? He said, I have come to realize that God is no respecter of persons. There are no highs and lows in God's mind. We're not more or less. We are all God's creation. We are all imago Dei, created in the image of God. We bear the mark of God on us. And for us to stand around and play favorites, favor this group over that group, create little, there's this great joke that said, oftentimes it was either talked about the Baptists or the Church of Christ, about people who go to heaven, and as they're walking through and St. Peter is showing them heaven, there's this door that's closed, and there's a paper across the little window there, and the person says, well, who is that? And he says, well, it's either the Baptists or the Church of Christ, because they don't believe that anybody else is up here. You meet people all the time who my faith is better than your faith. My dog is better than your dog. We love to do it. We play favorites. We do it, and James is saying that's not going to cut it in the world in which you live today.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the difference between discernment and judgment?
The what?
Discernment versus being judgmental.
Well, judgment is what you do.
Oh.
Discernment is what you think. Discernment is separating this and that and all. when we discern something, we're thinking about it, we're categorizing, we're classifying, and we do that all the time. But when we judge, we actually put that discernment into action. That would be my
Yeah.
word, that's what I would say it is.
You know, when I had never been studied this thing like I have done this year, for New Testament. I have come to appreciate what God is trying to make us to do, is to form a new kind of family. Family is not everybody smart, or not everybody good looking either. But that's a family. The family not where everybody have capability to do great things, no. The family have a lot of dysfunctional area.
There was a great story this week, and I think it was in the arts section of the Dallas Morning News, about this place over in, I believe it's the Bishop Arts area. It has the sign out in front that it's that has all the different Crayolas, and all of them are called Flesh. Some of them are black, and some of them are brown, and some of them, because when Crayola came out with Flesh, it was a peach color. And that was Flesh. And what it is that we're all the same color, really. We're all the color of in God's eyes, there's no difference in color. And the little Christmas carol that says, some see him black, some see him white, some see him yellow, that kind of thing. You're right, we're a family. And God is trying so hard to teach us, and we are so reluctant to learn. We don't learn from history. We don't learn from each other. It's the truth.
We're the consummate slow learners, aren't we?
We really are.
We're a little stubborn also.
We're very stubborn. We're very stubborn.
That's the slow learners.
Yeah. James says, if you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Is what part of that lesson do we not know? And yet we refuse to do it. We dismiss Jesus every day. We really don't much care for the New Testament faith. We're not much on Jesus, because when somebody says, what would Jesus do? We don't really want to know. If we did, it'd be a lot different world we live in. We really would. Okay. All right, moving on, because I've got a time constraint here. Look at 2:14 through 26. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? Well, yes, that's what Martin Luther would say, faith saves you. If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? There's this absolutely great Peanuts cartoon. Charlie Brown and Linus are walking, the snow's falling, and here is Snoopy, and Snoopy is like this. And they stop and see Snoopy, and they walk past him, and as they walk past, Linus says, be of good cheer, Snoopy. And then they walk on, and then the last frame, Snoopy is, what a great illustration of that. We do it all the time. We put Band-Aids on things. I mean, anytime we have a crisis, we love to put teddy bears and flowers and stuff like that, and then we walk right on by. We don't stop evil when it happens. We want it for the moment. We want to feel warm and good and things like that. And what he's saying is, that is not what this means. Faith and works are two sides of the same coin. If you say you have faith and you don't do anything about it, you're not a doer of the word, well, you really don't necessarily have faith. Works don't save you, but works are a part of your faith in action, and that's what he's saying. Again, coming back to it, I think those that had an understanding of the Greek really did understand this better than we understand it today, because they understand the action that is implied in the Greek word that we translate faith. That it's about doing something. Same thing is about love. love is not about something you have, love is something you do. That's the lesson that Jesus tried to teach us at Calvary. Love is about doing.
Now, if you have faith, true faith, then you would think that works just naturally happen.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not gonna
Oh,
be
yeah.
something, you don't have a problem.
That's right.
It's work for it. Exhibiting your faith.
Yeah, we've created conflict.
You look for opportunity.
Faith necessitates action.
How can you stand by and see somebody starving to death and not do anything about it?
Denial.
So that's what the lesson, faith and works are important. They go together. Like a horse and carriage, as the song says, you know, it's just a part of it.
But I agree, I think it comes naturally if your faith is, if you have the faith.
In mathematics, there's a if then and there's a if the IFF,
Yeah,
which is double if,
yeah,
which means if A then B and also if B then A, but that's not the way this is.
yeah, yeah.
Works don't produce faith. But
That's right.
faith doesn't produce works.
Yes, that's a great analogy. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's exactly right. Now, we can't stop without moving on to chapter 3, 1 through 12. And not many of you, and it goes on to talk about how great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. How many times would we have been so much better off if we had just kept our mouths shut? The tongue gets us into more trouble. It's been a problem that I've had all my life because I speak first and then I think later. And I'm trying to learn how to think before I speak.
At least you think.
Yeah.
At some point.
And, you know, we have learned, we have said so many bad things in our history. Just think about all of the things that we have done to justify or to demean, to marginalize, all the things. I make the point, we have this old saying that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. They do. That's a lie. Words do hurt us. Sometimes worse than sticks and stones. And we have used words to marginalize, to hate, to do things. We love in this society we live in today to call people names. Because that's our way of hurting them. And we do it to hurt. So, take the lesson.
We categorize people that way.
Yes.
It's grown though through social media.
Yeah. A lot, that is certainly, we have a test in that, don't we?
Yes.
Having to do that. All right, let's see if we can pick one more here. Let's look at 4:13 through 17. And I like verse 8. Draw near to God, and He, God, will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands and purify your hearts. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. It's about being proud. It's about boasting, and we all like to do that. That is the nature of the athletic competition today. When we do something, we all want to this or all the things we do on the field today to show that we're better than anyone else. And we do that in our advertising. We do it, it's just everywhere, you know. And James is saying to these people, you're not going to be able to live in the world, the Roman world you live in, if you keep doing this. You're never going to be able to be a witness if you keep doing this. boasting and being proud and arrogant and all that will just.
Look at also in our society with all this coming out about sexual harassment. I mean, one part that's not talked about is what we see every day in advertising and what's put before us.
Yes.
It makes objects.
Anytime we objectify anybody or anything, right, that's a great point. So, let's summarize. I hope you read the book. Read it again. And then once you've read it 2 or 3 times, read it one more time, because then you'll begin to kind of understand it. You know, here are a couple of conclusions that I would suggest. One is from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Couldn't be more plain. From a writer by the name of Jared McKenna, and I read several of the things, I would insist that orthodoxy always look like Jesus Christ. What is the mission of our church? To be a community of faith shaped by
the Spirit of
Jesus Christ. Orthodoxy ought to look like Jesus if you want things to be right. Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. James said, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only, because actions always speak louder than words. And from an unknown source, but it's a mantra that I use a lot, and I would encourage it for all of you. It's this: live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and leave the rest to God. And I think that's what James is saying to us. Any questions? All right, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, let's go through our prayer concerns here. Ben Cox, the eldest son of Michael Cox, suffering from severe depression. We'll certainly pray there. Tom Cox, you got it. Your brother of Michael Cox, suffering from esophageal ulcers and depression. Robert, let's see if I pronounce this right. Is it Coelho? Is it C, hard C or soft C?
Hard.
Hard, so Coelho. Okay. The father of Maria is having surgery to repair his esophagus. A praise from Diana for her safe trip and return from China, and grateful for prayers. And then one was added last, Steve Green, who's one of the ushers, has been in so much. Is there anything else you want to say on that one, Jerry?
No, just, I ran in Carol Ann and downstairs when I was greeting, and she was giving me kind of an update.
Right,
and
so.
But it looked like he had gone to rehab, but now
He
he's in
has.
Parkland.
But
He
he went back
made
to
it out
Parkland
in 1 or 2
this time
days.
because of low blood
Yeah.
pressure, which
Yeah.
was not mentioned at all the first time around.
Is there anything else we need to add to this before we pray? And thanks for your time today on this. And I like the idea of us doing this from Charles and Diane. Thanks for getting the book. And so, but is there anything else to add to this?
Just the church down in Southern Springs.
Right.
Yes.
They're having their first service in a
Yes.
stadium today. And for the first time, they're going to open up the sanctuary as a memorial. So that's going to be
All right, very good. Well, Brian, we're glad you're here with us, and Jen and Kate, we're glad you're back with us. Let's pray, and then we'll go to church. Thank you, Father, for a time that we can come and spend an hour focused on your word, and then another hour listening to music and to words of inspiration from our pastor. Father, help us today as we pray for those on our list. We pray for Ben Cox, and the eldest son of Michael, suffering from severe depression. For Tom Cox, the brother of Michael Cox, suffering from esophageal ulcers and depression. For Robert Coelho, the father of Maria Coelho, who's having surgery to repair his esophagus. Be with Robert Roberto this week as he goes through this, and those who are treating him medically, and give him the strength and energy to recover.
We have a prayer of praise for Diana's safe return, and the fact that she was grateful for the prayers. For Steve Green, who's been having such medical problems in the last month or two, who is back in the hospital with low blood pressure. Please be with Steve, his family, and those who love him and those who care for him. And of course, for the people of First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs, and for those who are mourning the loss of family members and friends, be with them and guide them in these coming days, and just give them the strength and courage to put one foot in front of the other one until there are times they can walk again on their own. Father, we thank you for Wilshire. Thank you for letting us be your hands and feet in this part of the world. And help us today as we go through into the service, that we might have a word that will be said that will trigger something in our heart, or a word from the Sunday school lesson today that Gwin led us in, that will resonate through the rest of our lives. And then we pray. Amen. Yes, ma'am. Take care of it. Good to see you. Tell me, mister.